Hi, my name is Adam Reitzel, and I'm a professor and associate dean of research and graduate education at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. My PhD research, which I completed in 2008, was focused on the ecology and evolution of sea anemones. And my work now as a professor focuses on comparative genomics of marine invertebrates, mostly cnidarians, as well as mechanisms of animal-environment interactions. I think the biggest success that I had is that I got the exact job that I wanted. I went through all the training, all the graduate school ups and downs that come with that, and all the uncertainty of academia. And I was still able to successfully be offered and accept a position that I really love. And so that's come with the ability to run a really fun lab, which I think we're doing a really good job. I think we're a successful lab. Of course, very biased in that feeling, but we've had a lot of success. We published good papers. We train good students and postdocs that go on to great careers and further training. And we have great collaborations all around the world. And so most every day is actually a heck of a lot of fun. And so I consider that to be a pretty big success. So I think one of the biggest challenges that comes to mind is something that occurred quite early in graduate school, which was a failed field season. So some general context is that my PhD program, it followed a master's degree that I did at the University of Florida. And so I thought I was pretty prepared for graduate school. I'd done the master's. I was like, okay, I got this. And so I thought I had it at least partially figured out, at least well enough to do a PhD. And the work I was proposing to do that I'd moved to Boston for was to study this little sea anemone, Nematostella vectensis, that lives in estuarine ecosystems up and down the Atlantic coast. I thought I'd done all my homework, and I really had this plan to do a combination of field work with laboratory work and to really bridge these disciplines. And so to come with that is you actually have to get out in the field. And so this field experience was to go out and collect this anemone, and I thought it was going to be really easy. I'd done a lot of reading in the literature where everyone says they're everywhere, they're very easy to find. And so we had planned this first large collecting trip early in my PhD program. And then we did the trip and we went site after site, location after location, and we found nothing. And so this went on for day after day, getting pretty just dejected with life and thinking, oh no, what have I done? But after a few days, we kind of kept trying and trying. And of course, on the last day, just before we got on the flight, we did successfully collect a few individual animals. So that felt really good. But what was creeping in that whole time, and probably why this comes to mind as a challenge I had in graduate school, is that I have really chronic imposter syndrome. And so events like this really don't help. I was moving into a fairly large lab group, and I thought I was going to bring this new expertise to this lab, which was really kind of a laboratory and computational lab. And I was going to bring this field side to the work and to my own career training. And so this event really got me questioning, do I have the skills for this? Have I just built a whole dissertation plan around something I can't do? And I think that really lends towards not only this professional idea of, can I do it? But as we know in graduate school, our personal lives as well as professional lives really get intertwined. And I think sometimes having a shortcoming or a challenge in the professional part can really carry over into one's personal life and how they feel about what they're doing with their life. I was fortunate to have a really great mentor for my PhD. He was very relaxed. And so he said, everything's going to be okay, Adam. You can still be a success. And that then carried on for the next 4.5 years with him as my PhD advisor. After this particular field collecting trip, I really sat back and kind of rethought how I was approaching the research and the work I was doing. It turns out reading the literature can only get you so far. And as a bookworm, I didn't want to accept that I didn't really want to accept that. And so what I did was I started reaching out to other field scientists who work in these habitats to really seek their expert advice, and maybe the things that aren't written in those publications. And I still do that to this day, actually. This was a life lesson that I learned early on in graduate school, where I still send routinely random emails to other scientists like, hey, I'm looking for this thing. Have you seen it? Do you have any recommendations to where to look for them, et cetera? So seeking out these expertise and experiences from others really gave me perspective, and I think probably others, that's really helpful in pursuing this type of work. And it's been really fruitful. Otherwise, I might be a 20th year PhD student right now, I'm not sure. You get those tips and advice from others. And then we use that advice to then go out in the next field season We adapted some new strategies, we tried some new techniques, and we learned that it turned out we were going about it all wrong the first time. And so we tried these other approaches, it's very successful. And then that then continued to this day. I still go out in the field and I still collect sea anemones using some of those techniques. I think memory is always kind of a funny thing with how we remember what happened when and were we was put together as what we thought we were, etc. But I think for me, I have a coping strategy that would be considered adaptive, where if I identify a problem, I just kind of dig in and just kind of keep going and going and researching it. And that's probably why I ended up at this career. I really like problem solving and kind of sticking to it until I get a solution that's at least satisfactory. And so I think a lot of this just comes with sort of adapting and really seeking help from others, not being too shy or uncertain with myself to not ask for help. That's really important. So what I learned and what I would tell my past self is what I now tell my current students that I mentor, which is that we can have the best laid plans. We think we have it all figured out, but sometimes the most obvious part of an experiment or whatever research you're doing can actually turn out to be the hardest part. And it's the challenge that you're not anticipating, and this can really throw you off center. And that's fine. I've learned to accept that now, but if you talked to me back then, that would have been maybe harder to say. And it's normal to have these shortcomings. It's normal to have these obstacles, even in the things that should be quote unquote the easiest. And so, so I'd like to tell myself, you're not going to be successful 100% of the time, and that's okay. You have to keep at it. If you really want it, you're going to keep going after it and to try to solve the problem. And so I think the idea of just normalizing these shortcomings, I don't want to call them failures because we learn from all of them, right? But I think normalizing this is part of any inquiry, any scholarship. And even if you're a fairly structured and kind of rigid person like me, that it's going to be okay. You just have to keep on keeping them. I think beyond being a graduate student myself, now many years ago, I've also served as a graduate programs director here at UNC Charlotte. And I think really what a lot of this boils down to is just communication. I think 95%, please don't quote me on the number, but a large proportion of issues can be solved through planned communication and active communication. And so, I tell my students the same thing I would tell myself, that you need to establish what that communication strategy is, the frequency, how you're going to have that communication with that mentor or mentors, depending on your type of mentorship structure. Because you have to think about establishing these relationships you're having with your mentor or anybody else very early on. And the easiest way to do that is to first talk about how are we going to communicate with each other. And I think that may sound a little silly, like, how am I going to talk to you? Shouldn't be a meeting. But I think it should be a meeting. And I think if you're doing like an individualized development plan, an IDP, that's always a question in those plans, which is how are you going to communicate, how often, and in what form? So I would just emphasize that. It's not only good practice, I think, for staying on task in a graduate degree program, but it also can put some more self-confidence because then you have automatic feedback like, am I doing enough? Am I falling behind? Does my advisor think I'm terrible? I think these are ways to kind of self-assess, and that can provide some confidence with going forward in any graduate training program. I think this applies much more broadly in life, but I think especially in graduate school, it's easy to get into our respective sort of corners or our holes where we're just learning, researching, and sometimes we forget to talk to people about it. And I think especially speaking with your mentor can help people stay on track, can help build the self-confidence, and can ultimately have a more successful graduate training experience. Thanks for watching Fail Safe Science. My name's Adam, and I hope my story helps graduate students feel a little less alone.